The goal can't be to be the only one in the room. I remember talking to a friend of mine, a very powerful Black man who's been very powerful in the corporate world for a long time. And when all the Me Too Time's Up stuff was really on fire, he said, you know, it's really made me have to think to myself, why haven't we done more for equity? And I said, because you were so happy to be in the room. You were so happy to be in the room that you didn't turn around and say, what about her? And you were worried if we were in the room that we might make you put your Blackness ahead of your manness. And you know your manness gives you more power. So it's
you
like,
told him the truth.
My name is Angelique Jackson, and joining me for this Black Women of Award season conversation are Kerry Washington, producer of The Fight, and Laverne Cox, producer of Disclosure. Hello, ladies.
Hello. Hi.
Black women have played such a central role in society this year. So in talking about your two films with Disclosure and with The Fight, how have you related to having them out in this moment?
Laverne, you want to start?
Let you start, Kerry.
I have to say, like, we've never produced a documentary before at Simpson Street. This is our first documentary. Is that true for you too, Laverne? Is this your first?
No, I've done a few documentaries at this point. I've wanted to move into scripted like you, so.
I loved your film.
According to a study from GLAAD, 80% of Americans don't actually personally know someone who is transgender. So most of the information that Americans get about who transgender people are, what our lives are and are about, comes from the media.
And there's some crossover between our films. Shout out to Chase Strangio.
Right? I know, Chase, we should have Chase with us on here. This moment feels like a really important moment for us to be grappling with truth. And I think that's why a lot of people are focusing on docs and gravitating toward docs and like voraciously, just absorbing documentary filmmaking right now, because we've had a sort of ecosystem of dishonesty and a lack of transparency in our leadership and like gaslighting on an institutional structural level that I think has made us all really want to know the truth, speak the truth, teach the truth. So to have films like these in this moment feels really important. And I'm really proud that we were able to bring this film forward, to bring The Fight forward, particularly in an election year, to remind people what the stakes are across all of these important verticals, whether it's about LGBTQ issues, whether it's about reproductive rights, abortion rights, whether it's about immigrant issues, whether it's about voting rights or the census. Like, there are so many wars that we are fighting in order to maintain our human rights. And so having these conversations is so, so important right now.
What is so special about Disclosure is, well, our director, Sam Fader. Sam had been researching this film for about 4 or 5 years before we even met. And when I met him at a presentation he did at Outfest in 2017, where he presented the research that would become Disclosure, I was blown away by it. I'd always wanted to do a film that sort of was like The Celluloid Closet. I'd seen The Celluloid Closet, and for those folks who don't know, it's a film inspired by Vito Russo's book of the same name that looks at the history of gay and lesbian representation in Hollywood. And there's another film called Ethnic Notions, directed by Marlon Riggs, that does the same thing for African-American representations in film. And I had always wanted to do something like that for trans people. And Sam had been doing the research. And so we met up, and I just fell in love with him and his brilliant idea. He was like, I want this film to be by trans people completely. I want a mostly trans crew. And when we cannot find a transgender person to fill a role on that crew, I want to have that a cisgender person mentor a trans person. So every single contributor on screen in Disclosure, every person on screen in Disclosure is trans. Every single one of them was paid. The crew was paid and the fellows were paid. And it's a really interesting model for documentary filmmaking that I want to try to incorporate into producing I do in the future. It's tricky, but what is so inspiring about Disclosure is that Sam has taught me and is teaching the world that it is possible, that you can have a film with a very low budget and find funding and hire mostly trans people, have a fellowship program, pay everyone for their stories, and create an environment on set where everywhere they looked, there was a trans person. And that was so integral in telling the story of transgender representation on screen.
What was it like for you? Do you remember standing on set, looking around and seeing the environment that you had cultivated, that you had empowered?
So it was different when I was not on screen and I was just behind the scenes and I was talking to Sam about ask this, and then I was from stories. And so when I wasn't on camera, I was doing stuff. And when I was on camera, I was trying to sort of remember all the things that Sam and I had talked about, all the things I had researched and prepared. And it just was like, you sort of get all this information and then I just like sort of blurting it out. So it was kind of a blur, but it was just it was a beautiful set. And I've been on a lot of sets. I'm so blessed and grateful, but there was just such a beautiful energy on set every day. And
I was going to talk about a similar experience on Little Fires in how we basically cast our writer's room, because we knew that we were going to be telling a story about motherhood, about race, about class. And so we cast this writer's room to have like every possible topic we were exploring, somebody could speak to it from a personal perspective or point of view. But we also didn't have one Black woman in the room, right? We had like 3 or 4 Black women in the room. And, they talk about it in terms of boards for companies, right? Like if you have one person of color, they're still in the minority. If you have 2 people, they compete. You really need 3 people of color or 3 women in order for people to really have their voice. And we had that by building out a writer's room where people could really have their voice because they weren't alone and they didn't feel the weight of being the only in the room, the way you talk about, Laverne. Like, when you're the only on set, whether it's the only woman, the only Black person, the only Black woman, whatever, the only trans woman, you have all of this additional weight and responsibility to be speaking for your race, speaking for your people, speaking for your community, as opposed to being like an artist who also has the shared experience of belonging to that community. And so to create an environment where our writers could be artists first and where we could have a multiplicity of perspectives of what it means to be a Black mama so that we could get to the reality of what this character's experience was really powerful. And I felt it. There were moments where I would watch a particular edit and feel like, oh man, the feedback I need to give right now, I need to give it to a Black person because I need to bounce this off my sister first so that we know, so that I'm sure we're on the same page, that when we come back explaining why we need to see more side eye in that scene, we're able to say it in the right way and people understand the dynamics of what's happening for this Black woman in this moment. And so I think that it's really powerful creating opportunities where people feel safe to bring their perspectives to the table and that they don't have to carry the weight of being the only while they do that.
Can I ask you something, Kerry? When I think about you, I often think that you have multiple children, that you are an actress, that you produce, and I think you were nominated for 11 Emmys last year. and so I'm like, I don't have children, I'm single, and I struggle with doing all the things that I have to do. I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, Kerry must be so organized.
I promise if you want this, I will text you the next time I'm having a meltdown about being overwhelmed so that you can really viscerally experience that nobody does this perfectly, that nobody wears all the hats perfectly without feeling like a mess at some point. You can ask Namdi, he'll tell you the meltdowns happen.
Thank you. We need to hear that. I need to hear that.
No, it's true. I actually have a dream of like all of us multi-hyphenate folks, like especially the women, right? Like you and Reese and Lopez and like all of Regina King, like all of us who are America Ferrara, right? Like doing so much, balancing so many different roles. I would love for us to have a secret convening where we give some tricks of the trade. Like, what does your staff look like? What's the organizational structure of how you get your support? How many folks do you have helping you? Or part of giving myself permission to grow was also giving myself permission to, and this is something I'm working on all the time, but to delegate and to ask for help, right? To allow people, like if I want to be creating opportunities for more and more folks, I'm going to need more and more help to do that. Like the opportunities are not just on set, they also maybe are within my inner circle of my team, so that together we can all be creating exponentially more opportunities. But because I was thinking about it when you were talking about being in the hat and like being in the chair and trying to remember all the things that you were supposed to remember in the interview, because you're also a producer. Like at some point, I have a producing partner, Pilar Savone, who runs Simpson Street with me. At some point, I have to turn to her and say, like, look, obviously, if there's a fire, I'm here to help you put it out. No pun intended for little fires. But like, right now, I need to start to transform. At the end of the day, when I'm taking off the makeup and before I get in the car, let's talk budget, let's talk casting. But like in the first half of the day, you need to let me have my zone, and I'm going to trust that she, you know, she's an extraordinary partner. I met her on Django. She used to work for Quentin, so I know she can handle it, and she does beautifully. But having partners in the trenches with us is really, really important. I loved working with Reese Witherspoon because she does the work, right? So I could trust on the days when Reese had to like scream and cuss out her kids and burn her house down. She knew I was in the trailer signing checks and, you know, talking to HR and making sure we had the next day locked down. And same for me. When I'm confessing the lies to my child that I've been telling her for 16 years, I knew she had it on. You know, she was looking at the daily. She was going to let me know where the problems were. So we have to have that in sisterhood. We have to have that as producers, as creators, I think, particularly when we wear as many hats as we wear. I remember I was at the Time magazine, like, what's it, 50 most that we've also both been a part of, that we can't remember what it's called. But it was a year that Amy Poehler was on the list. And I went to the event at Lincoln Center, and Amy Poehler stood up and she said, the only person I want to thank for this is my nanny. She said, because I have an amazing agent, an amazing lawyer, an amazing team, and hair and makeup artists and all of that. But I don't get to do my job if I don't get to know that this other person is helping me to raise human beings. I mean, I was like, I was years away from being married or having children, but it stuck with me. Like it really does take a village to make a movie, to make a TV show, to raise a child, whatever it is. It takes it, like, self-reliance is not the goal.
I'm curious about the idea that as women and as Black women, we are multi-hyphenate, how we've had to kind of do it ourselves, especially in this industry, because of the often lack of opportunities that are presented to us. So I would love to know more about how you guys have taken that on and learned how to make that work for you.
What made you start to produce, Laverne?
So my brother, I have a twin brother, and my brother is one of the people in my life who always tells me the truth. Many years before I had a breakout moment as an actor, and I was in acting school, and I was studying and taking it very seriously and wanting to have a mainstream acting career, my brother was like, you're Black and you're trans. That's not going to happen. You should produce your own work. You should do one-woman shows. You can make your own films. That's what you should be doing. And so before I did the I Want to Work for Diddy show, I had been working with a group of producers, and we had been, we wanted to do a docuseries about trans women and the men that they date. It's a subject that's still, you know, I'm very invested in. So I had a production company back in 2007. And so we had been working on things then, and putting reels together and pitching things. And so when the VH1 moment happened, when VH1 came to me and said, we would love to do a show with you, I was like, well, I have some producers that I'm working with. Let's talk. And we pitched the show, and they loved the show, and we did it. That company fell apart for a lot of different reasons, but it came out of wanting to have some kind of control over my career.
I love that. It's similar. I've never thought about it as I guess I have thought about producing, being connected to my identity as a Black woman. I have mostly thought about it as like, we're just good at doing a lot of stuff. Like, we've always had to do a lot of stuff. We've always had to balance a lot of stuff. You know, we've never, traditionally, Black women have not been like stay-at-home moms. We haven't been in a place of privilege. We've always had to juggle. But I also think, in listening to Laverne, I thought, oh, there's something also about the agency of like, I get to control my body, myself, my story, that is so necessary to us feeling like the women we're meant to be, right? Like our history, particularly in this country, all over the diaspora, obviously, but particularly in this country, our history is so much about our bodies belonging to other people. So to be able to really have agency, to call the shots, to be able to be the storytellers, I think is very empowering, and it feels right. It feels like full personhood on set.
You both know what it's like to be trailblazers and to be the first this or the first that. How can you describe what it's like to be in that position and to, that mix of pride and but also responsibility, but also pressure?
Oh, I know it well. The pressure piece. It's mostly pressure for me, and responsibility. It depends on the moment. I've said this many times publicly, but I remember when I was on the cover of Time magazine in 2014, and I was the first.
But you can see that cover in Chase's office in the fight.
Yes.
Oh my God. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm the first openly trans person to be on the cover of Time magazine, and the transgender tipping point was sort of declared. And I remember saying in the article, I remember sort of going around and doing press and saying there's not just one trans story. And there's many trans stories. I was the one trans person at the time that people were talking about and wanting to talk to. And I'm trying to, shift the lens to the community as a whole. And it was very stressful, and there was a lot of responsibility. And I've always understood that the first of anything, particularly with Black or trans or whatever, it's usually that first has been decided by a white gatekeeper, a cisgender gatekeeper, someone who has been considered acceptable and respectable by a sort of status quo standard. I'm grateful for my opportunities, but I don't have them uncritically. I'm not sitting in this, although the wonderful privileges I have uncritically, that some white gatekeeper, some cisgender gatekeeper has said that this person is respectable enough to walk through the door. And so the question is, for me, has always been for me, how do we keep the door open? How do we open a window? How do we just let the whole wall come down so that more people can come in? And I think that is the challenge of being a first something. And what's been lovely over the past few years, and at least with trans representation on television, that there are a lot more trans people on TV now.
All day yesterday, I was wearing my shirt that has Kamala's little face as a little girl, and it says next to it, the first but not the last, because that has to be the message. Yeah. And so it can't be, the goal can't be to be the only one in the room. And for a long time, I remember talking to a friend of mine, a very powerful Black man who's been very powerful in the corporate world for a long time. And when all the Me Too Time's Up stuff was really on fire, he said, it's really made me have to think to myself, why haven't we done more for equity? And I said, because you were so happy to be in the room. You were so happy to be in the room that you didn't turn around and say, what about her? And you were worried if we were in the room that we might make you put your Blackness ahead of your manness. And your manness gives you more power. So it's
you told him the truth. Go on.
So you have to, it's like, you really, when we talk about our intersectional identities as well, we have to bring all of us and all that I am, all of the communities, and that, Fannie Lou Hamer, we are not free until we are all free.
When is the first time that you remember feeling seen for your work?
I don't know when the first time was, but I remember the first time I met Kerry. I don't know if you remember this, Kerry. I was in LA for the Emmys because I was nominated, my first nomination. And we made eye contact across the room and you smiled at me. And I was like, oh my God, Kerry Washington. I was like, I was very new in all of this. And I was in New York and I was in Hollywood and I was utterly starstruck, my first Emmys. And you smiled at me from across the room with the biggest smile. I was like, oh my God, she's smiling at me. And then you walked up to me and said, how does it feel to make history? And it was the sweetest, most, I could cry thinking about it because it was just so sweet and welcoming and just amazing. And I was like, oh my God, I love her so much even more. So yes, I don't remember the first time I felt seen from my work, but I remember the first time I felt seen by you, Kerry, and it was really beautiful. It was really beautiful. Thank you.
I'm not gonna add anything to that. I just am gonna cry for the next hour because it's so beautiful. I remember it. I totally remember it. And you know, I think part of why that was my question to you was to also say, like, you're not alone. You know, it was at a point in Scandal where that was such a part of what the conversation was the history. We were making the history. And I just also, I wanted you to know what a fan I was, but also that you're not alone.